Hi, I'm Lindsay.
Hi, I'm Cristi, and we work with Globe International.
Working with missionaries, we hear stories of the struggles, the humor, God's goodness, and a little side of crazy.
Hey, that's who we are.
This is Crazy Missionary Stories. Hello, and welcome back to Crazy Missionary Stories. Today we are interviewing Cristi, not Cristi, our co-host, a different one. It might get a little confusing, but she was raised on the mission field. So Cristi, will you tell us what you're currently doing in your life?
Yes, I took a 360 on my life, and I went from serving full-time at a church, working there, to becoming a medical interpreter.
Can you explain kind of what a medical interpreter is? Like, what do you do?
Everything. So I basically go between hospitals and therapies. Sometimes it can depend really, like schools, events, things like that. And I translate from Spanish to English for those limited in English families.
That's really cool. So just hearing that you speak Spanish, where were you raised on the mission field?
I was born and raised in South Mexico by the border of Guatemala.
I know a little bit about kind of your story. We've heard from your dad.
Yeah.
So do you want to kind of touch on that? You want to start there?
Yeah, of course. Let's see. Many years ago, if I'm not mistaken, he was invited to a missions conference in Chiapas, Mexico. And for the longest time, he and my mother had been trying to have kids and were unable to. So at this conference, there was a missionary that had an orphanage. And, you know, all the missionaries were together and they were talking, and she was saying that she had this brand new baby girl, about 3 weeks, 3 months, something like that. And they said, hey, you know, are you interested? And, you know, everybody kind of looked at each other and was like, oh, and they knew that my dad and my mom had been trying. So he asked, what is the name of this baby? And they said, well, she doesn't have a name. We found her on the streets. It's kind of a tough situation. So we just named her Anna. And my dad lit up and he was like, my wife's name is Anna. I'm going to take this baby with me. And so everybody's like, well, you're not going to ask your wife or anything? And he responded with, I told my wife that God would provide the perfect baby at the perfect time. And this is his perfect time. And so after that, you know, they started a process. Of course, he called my mom and they talked about it. She prayed about it. And the next day she was on the first flight, I believe it was from central Mexico south. And as soon as she landed, I was handed into their arms and we started a journey together for almost 11 years for adoption. Yeah.
Had to come back stateside for that adoption to take?
At the end of it, yeah, to finish up citizenship and all that good stuff. But most of it was in Mexico because I couldn't, since I was found on the streets, they did background checks. From what I understood, they did background checks and there was no family. It was kind of like I came out of nowhere.
Wow, goodness.
And so they would take turns coming and going, you know, with missions and things like that. But at the end of it, I got the green card and we came and I got to see my dad's family.
Mom is actually from Mexico,
From
right?
Mexico, yes.
Yeah. When I first met you, and I don't know how long I knew you, Cristi, before I even knew that you were adopted. And I always love it. Like, I know when I was in Costa Rica, I was in an orphanage originally, and I loved seeing that the parents who adopted the kids, oftentimes the child looked a lot like at least one of the parents. And I would say, you look a lot like your mom.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I really think
Yeah,
so.
I would have never, same thing. I kind of just knew your family and never would have guessed you were adopted. That's so,
I get that
that's
all
so
the
cool
time.
though.
It's like, I think with time, the more time you spend with people, you kind of start looking
Yeah.
alike.
Yeah. So you were kind of just like, not necessarily born into missions, but you were a very young baby and your mom and dad were already in missions when they adopted you, right?
Yes.
So it was kind of just like, you're born into this, it's just your life. So tell me like what life looked like with your parents being missionaries in Mexico. What did your daily life look like?
From what I remember, like starting, they were planting churches in Chiapas. So we would travel up to the mountains with the indigenous communities. And they started out small churches and there was one time I remember we had a team, like a medical team, that came and they did vaccines, they checked for lice, just basic medical care, or like grooming, things like that. And so I remember that, you know, we had a couple teams come out with us and take them up to the mountains, have experienced the whole, you know, on the ground type stuff, you know, slipping and sliding down the mountain with the mud and having to walk, you know, to the church and all that stuff. But, you know, we would travel on the weekends and do service with the indigenous communities. And at some point in my youth, my parents realized that I could sing. And I had like a passion for playing the guitar. So I started lessons, I started, you know, kind of self-teaching, and that was about maybe 6 years old or so.
Wow.
And so, yeah, so when we went up, you know, once I was a little bit better at it, I would do like a special song, and then my dad would preach. And so that was something we always did together. So growing up, doing ministry with my dad was fun.
So since you were young, you were involved in ministry with your parents then.
Yes.
And you still now, when you travel with your dad in Mexico, you still do that sort of thing, right? You still lead some worship and then he preaches.
Yes. Yes. The main church that we attend in Chiapas, the pastor will often, if he knows I'm in town, he'll be like, hey, can you help us out with worship, or do like a, he calls it a concert, but you know, it's like a, hey, can you lead worship, you know, with the team? So we'll get together and organize, and then he'll organize for me to go to a couple churches, and same thing, like I'll sing and my dad will preach.
Did you homeschool or did you attend a school?
Both. Yeah, when we were in central Mexico by Guadalajara, I remember I went to school for a little bit, and then at some point I was pulled out, did homeschooling. When we moved to South Mexico, I homeschooled, and I tried a couple schools. We did like two, like they finished 1 year in one, I finished another year in another one. And then we were like, that's not really working because of the, you know, just being in missions, you have to be very flexible. And so we went back to homeschooling and tried like U.S. homeschooling. And then we'd go, you know, in the indigenous communities. So I wouldn't miss school necessarily. And once things were kind of calmed down, you know, go back to school. So it was a little bit of everything going on. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of change.
Yes.
Did you feel like that affected you as a kid, or did you just kind of like, you were all in, like?
Yeah, I feel like I never really struggled with it. I mean, even when we had to move houses or things like that, I mean, for me, it was an adventure. Like, oh, we'd go look at houses, or if we wanted to, you know, move somewhere different, it's like you tour the house, and I'm like, oh, let's see what I could do here. And, you know, you get to learn something different. So it was always a good, you know, never really struggled with the idea of moving or packing up. It really helped me adapt to like change.
Did you come back to the States a lot when you were young?
No, because I didn't have any papers.
So what would happen then? Would your dad come to the States for
Yes.
fundraising, and you and your mom would stay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. If it was, yeah. Or they'd, you know, take turns if she wanted to come up to the States, and he would stay with me and stuff. But mainly it was my dad that would go.
So
the US.
So if your adoption was finalized after 11 years, you were 11 years old when you became a U.S. citizen then?
Yes.
And that was when you were finally able to come to the U.S.?
Uh-huh.
So I'm sure that was hard, or how was it for you? One parent leaves, it comes to the States, you've never been here. You stay in Mexico with the other one. Like, did you feel like, was that hard for you, or really just didn't think a whole lot about it?
Didn't really think a lot about it. I think from a very young age, I mean, I knew what my parents did with ministry, and I knew it was a lot of, you know, changes and going back and forth. Because even in Mexico, my dad would go to different cities or towns with pastors or things like that. So my dad traveling, going out of town, it's always been present in my life.
So your first time going to America, what was that like?
It was exciting. It was exciting because I was getting to meet, well, not meet, I'd already met my family, but I get to see them all together. It was really nice. Yeah, I'm like trying to say everything was like so different, but at the same, it was kind of like, oh, okay, cool. Chick-fil-A was like a big, that was the first thing. My mom's brother, he took me to Chick-fil-A, and I was in love. I was like, a chicken sandwich. I'm like, who would have thought? The greatest thing.
So funny.
And it was Christian chicken. I mean, what? The Lord's chicken.
So after that, so you get your American citizenship, but you guys still live in Mexico, right?
Yes. No. So I actually started 6th grade. We moved here in August, which is when school was kind of starting back up.
Yeah.
So I started going to a private Christian school, and it was supposed to be temporary, just in the meantime while we could get settled and go back. But I fell in love with the school. I loved, one of the things that really impressed me about the school was that the principal, he really had the attention of knowing his students. I mean, even though it was a small-ish school, I mean, he knew every single student by name. And in Mexico, you rarely see that they take the time and stop and talk to you or something like that. So I was very impressed. You know, teachers and the principal, they all knew my name, and I was like, oh my gosh. And so I loved the school. Since it was a Christian private school, Bible class was like one of my favorite things. So I would come home and it was like exciting for me to go to school. So my parents decided we would stay until I finished high school because of that. Yeah.
Wow, you don't hear that too often, where somebody just loves their school like that.
Right?
You're very blessed. Yeah, I'm like, I thought there was something bad coming, like school was terrible.
It was terrible. Well, high school was different, but elementary-wise was good. My favorite subject was Bible, and it was like, that was a subject I really excelled on.
Well, I have a question for you then. Was it difficult adjusting to the language here in the U.S.? When you were in Mexico, did you speak Spanish in the home, or did you speak English? Like, there's a very different culture and language coming back to the U.S. or coming into the U.S. from Mexico. What was that like for you? What was it like in the home? Did you speak English? Did you speak Spanish? What?
So growing up, I've always had both. So with my dad, it's been English. With my mom, it's always been Spanish and Spanish only. You mentioned culture shock earlier. I think that happened after we had spent a couple months here, and then I went back to Mexico. You know, in Mexico, the culture is like very hugging and kissing, and you know, it's very on you type, you know, type friendship. And so, and here in the U.S., it's kind of, you know, a little bit more reserved, more, you know, handshake or whatever. And since I grew up with Spanish and English, we had a good balance. But when we moved here, it constantly being English, somehow it became an easier, you know, adapting to English. So at some point I stopped speaking Spanish, and I would answer my mom in English, and she would repeat the question until I answered her in Spanish. And I'm like, I already told you my answer. And she's like, no, you have to say it in Spanish.
That's good. She was looking out for you in that way. And now you're using it in your job. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, kind of like on the lines of culture, coming back to America and being like in high school and that kind of stuff, did you ever feel like you were just like so different from the other kids, or did you find it easy to fit in?
I thought it was a little different. I think it wasn't until I graduated, like a year or so after I graduated, that I realized, really, you know, putting in perspective how God really protected me from a lot of things. I know towards the end of high school, it was the first time that I had experienced kind of like, not really racism, but, you know, just comments towards, you know, that make you kind of go, what? So that was like one of the first things, and I was like, oh, I don't really know how to feel about this. But it wasn't something that really, knocked me down or made me feel less or changed anything about who I was. And even in high school, I always kind of thought like my circle was very small. And even though I wanted more friends, it was more of like, it's just not working out. So, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, well, that's fine too. But I never really thought of it like, oh, maybe, things happen for a reason. Like maybe God's got something set aside,
Mm-hmm.
But even after I graduated, I realized, I went through high school and didn't even realize the impact that I had on some people's lives, or even the things that I was just not even aware of that happened around me. And so, so that was pretty cool to realize afterwards.
I really like the fact, Cristi, and I guess because I know you and I know a little bit of what you've done here in the States, just the fact that you've been involved in ministry. You worked at a church, right? You were on staff at a church for a time here locally, and on the worship team. And seems to me like missions and ministry must not have been a traumatic thing for you as a child, as being on the mission field and in your family involved in ministry, for you to continue in that here in the U.S. as an adult. Can you? How was that for you? Did you feel like your parents just really made you a part of it, and that was something that you loved, or was it just seeing what they were doing? What impacted you to make you want to be involved in ministry yourself?
There was a moment when we went in Tuxtla, where I'm from. There was a moment where we went to a church, and it's located in a community that's very poor. It's basically in like a dumpster area type, and but these people, I mean, they're just super poor, but they have their church. And when I remember, I went with my parents, and I did the song, and then my dad preached and whatnot. But I had a couple kids that came up to me, and I was about 13 maybe, where I had a couple kids come up to me, and they looked me straight in the eyes, and they were like, hey, when I grow up, I'm going to be just like you. Oh. And I think that really touched my heart. I've also always had a heart for people. I mean, I can't see someone in the street without trying to help them in some way. I think growing up in ministry really made that part of who I am, made that part of my character. And so I love serving people, whether it's in ministry or it's, in just, me, and only God sees it, So I think that that's always been part of who I am.
You were talking with me in the car. I picked you up from the airport this morning, and the world doesn't know that, but now they do. So, just in the ride here, just talking about different things and what it was like on the field, you shared a little bit about the spiritual battle. Can you share a little bit about that with us? Like just some of the things that you saw. I don't know if you were always aware of the spiritual struggle that was going on. Did you know about that when you were a kid, or more as an adult when your parents?
I feel like it was more as an adult. When we lived in central Mexico, there was a lot of spiritual warfare. Where we were ministering was very tough place to plant churches and things like that. And I didn't come to realize that until afterwards. Just the things that I was not aware of, or not oblivious to, but just protected in that sense. I mean, as a kid, just living normal life, playing with your friends, you go to the ministry, you go to church and stuff like that. But I think spiritual battles were more my parents that faced more of that stuff.
I just was really impressed, like you shared about somebody, how they said that you were talking with after they had gone back to the area that you guys had lived and then left from, and was saying about how these people were trying to push them out, like whether they're involved in witchcraft or witches particularly, but they literally told this person, we're going to push you out.
Yeah. He one of my best friends growing up in central Mexico, they went back to the small town. His dad still has church groups and stuff in the area, and when he returned, a man approached him and told him that he said, you know, you need to leave. He said, you need to leave. If not, we're gonna kick you out the same way we did your dad, because he was bringing too much peace. And I mean, I've never experienced something like that, but I can't even imagine, you know, having someone come up to you that's spiritually oppressed, you know, and say something like that to you. And so, you know, I'm thankful that I didn't, you know, I didn't have to, but kind of heartbreaking too that there's areas that are spiritually oppressed like that, and, you know, it's just so heavy.
Did you ever have an experience, like as a kid, where you leave and you're like, oh, that was kind of scary?
Not really. I think, well, there are times, and, you know, I don't know if it's like a spiritual gift or something, but in my heart, if something's not spiritually correct, it bothers me, and it just stirs me, and it makes me uncomfortable, and like I just can't, you know, be around it. And I feel like that's really developed more as an adult than, but I've always had that, you know, if something's spiritually not right, my heart starts pounding. And it's just something that I'm like, okay, I have to walk away now.
Like the gift of discernment or something like that.
You can sense it. Yeah, you feel it when it's off.
So, our signature question, Cristi, can you think of any crazy stories that happened to you on the field, off the field even?
Yeah. I remember this one time. This was about 7 years ago. My dad and I in Chiapas, growing up, we would hike this mountain that's right behind our apartment. And one day, on the way down, we decided that, well, I say we, he decided he was going to do some rock climbing. And normally I'm one to go with the flow, you know. Sometimes, most of the times, I was a daddy's girl, so I would follow my dad anywhere or wherever. But this time, it was more of a, I'll wait down here. And, you know, it started, you know, at a slope, and it connected to the thing, and then the rock keeps going, but the ground goes, you know, down. So my dad starts rock climbing, and
she put it in quotes. For
I
those
put it in
just
quotes
listening.
because it's not formal rock climbing without gear. And I noticed on the rock wall thingy, there was like a hole thing that goes in, and there was a bouquet of white flowers. And I didn't think anything of it when I saw it, but my dad just happened to be right above it. And I said, hey, look. And I said, look down. I said, there's a bouquet of flowers. As I went to reach for it, he was like, don't touch that. So, and it's believed, you know, and the higher you are, the closer you are, it's more spiritual. And so a lot of people that do, you know, witchcraft, things like that, they hike up a mountain to do their...
They go to the high places.
Right. And so as soon as he looked at this bouquet of flowers that was in the cave, the rock he was holding on to came loose, and he just falls backwards. And my first instinct is to catch him somehow. I mean, I think I thought I was Spider-Man or something. I don't know.
And how old were you?
I was 16. And, you know, my first thing was like, I got you. And it's like, I don't got you. And then I was like, but maybe I should. And the short span of time, I had time to think, you know, yes, no, yes. And so by the time I just realized that wasn't impossible, I just kind of moved out of the way, and he hit my shoulder, flung me out the way. And I think that was one of the scariest moments of my life, because when he hit that ground, he went pale. And I said, it's over. He's gone.
Oh, wow.
And the fear that overcame at that moment, I think, was something that I never want to see again, you know, just the thought of losing, you know, him. And I was like, in an instant, it could have been, you know, just gone. But, you know, I'd never hiked down a mountain so fast and back up. It always took us a long time to get up and down that mountain. But in that day, I didn't know what to do, you know, like, do I call, do I not? And when he kind of came to, he was like, don't call anybody, don't tell your mother. And I was like, how am I not going to tell my mother? And so I think that was one of the craziest things that happens.
Yeah, that is so scary.
He took a while to recover from that fall too, didn't he?
He did. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, he fractured his spine or something like that. But the doctor said that because he hit me first, he wasn't paralyzed. So I kind of broke that fall for him. So he can thank me that he's not.
Did you hurt your shoulder at all?
It did, but it wasn't as bad as his. He took a long time to, with pain and things like that, figuring out how to handle that. But thankfully now, I think he's doing better.
He hasn't rock climbed since then, right?
I don't think so. I think he learned his lesson after that day.
Oh my goodness. Well, I have a question. If you don't feel comfortable answering it, just let me know. I'm wondering if you've ever felt the desire to find your biological parents.
I did at some point, but I think now I'm just kind of like, why? I wouldn't really see any. Well, I don't think it would do any. Push me to do anything better or anything like that. From what I understood, my birth mom was an alcoholic. And so, I mean, I've thought about it so many times, but just in the end, I think more on the side of I'm grateful that God brought me out of that situation and put me where I'm at today, because I don't think I would have gotten the experiences that I've had, or to get to do the things that I've done if I would have stayed.
Yeah, I think so much we don't think about what it would be like as an adopted child.
Yeah.
At one point in my life, started the process for an adoption to adopt a baby, and just learning a lot about what that's like. Just how holidays become a day that you think about the things that were, how could it have been? Where is my birth mom?
Yeah.
Things like that. Yeah, and I haven't ever really considered that with you, and that's just probably a whole part of your life that maybe a lot of people don't think about.
Yeah. Yeah, I have had people ask, and we thought about it at some point, but I just kind of was like, no, I'm like, well, if they're okay, like, hey, like, we bless them, and we're thankful that something good came out, but I think everything is good as it is right now.
Anything you want to share about adoption? You guys are an amazing family. You seem to have a great relationship with your parents.
Yes.
And I know a lot of Latinos, and I don't hear a lot of them talking hopefully about adoption. Yeah. Which is interesting to me, because I don't see that their fears to be true at all in your life, right, or your family's life. So would there be anything you would want to share about adoption now that you've got a moment?
Yeah.
An opportunity?
Let's see. I know it's hard on at least, whoever is adopting. I know for my parents, it was a spiritual battle constantly. My parents and I really haven't touched the subject on, for them personally, what it was like. But what we have discussed, from what I understand, it was a lot of like a spiritual, mental battle too. At some point, the thought of, things not going well and me having to go to the system, it was an idea that just terrified my mom, at least. I know she struggled with that part at some point. And the enemy came at her with thoughts of, why did you go through all this? It's not worth it. They're going to take her. They're going to come and they're going to take her. And everything you did, everything you went through, was for nothing. But I think for me, adoption really showed me like my parents' characters. I think, and I've always said this, I admire their faithfulness in serving, even in uncertainty, and their faithfulness in standing firm, that they know that God is good and that God comes through, even when it seems like it's going completely wrong. You know, they trust that God has something in store, you know, even if it's not what they thought it was going to be. So growing up with adoption, it showed me a lot of who God is. And I think it placed a lot in my life, just, you know, that faithfulness, you know, that I know that God is faithful, and I've seen him, you know, come through and do things that just unexplainable. Especially, you know, since I remember traveling to my birth town, and we would go and we'd have to do fingerprints and whatnot. For me, it was a road trip. It was fun. For my parents, probably a completely different story. But I remember the day when we actually did the fingerprints and we finalized everything. But we traveled so often to that town to do papers that I didn't even realize that that was the end. I was kind of expecting, you know, oh, we're going to keep coming back, you know, but no, like that one day when we did the fingerprints, I have a picture with my dad, and, you know, I'm holding my black thumb. And that was the day that we finalized everything, and I was officially part of their family.
Wow. I bet that was such a huge relief for your parents.
Yeah,
like,
I think so.
that's one
Yes.
thing we don't have to worry about anymore. Traveling back and forth, that I'm sure that was so scary.
Yes.
I have kind of a loaded question.
Okay.
So, just talking with other people or just hearing other people's stories of adoption, a lot of times people who are adopted feel like kind of they don't fit in. I've heard missionary kids have like that same feeling. And you're both.
Yeah.
But you sound like you're so secure in yourself and your family in Christ. Did you or your parents do anything specific to just help you feel like you are in our family, you are our daughter, you are part of this ministry? Like, is there anything that stands out that you could encourage parents and people who maybe were adopted or are missionary kids that are struggling? Like, just any type of encouragement, because I don't know about you, but I hear so many stories where it's just a struggle with their identity.
Right. Yeah. I think I did struggle for it. It wasn't something that shook me until this past year, and I can go a little bit into that later, but my parents were always honest with me from the very beginning. From the moment that I could start understanding, you know, I was told I was adopted. Hey, this is your story. If I had any questions, you know, they were always very open with the topic, and you know, if I wanted to meet my other family, you know, they were always they never tried to hide anything, really. And I think it was part of our life. It was part of our daily life. I mean, you know, we always did things together, and since the system let me be in-house with them, so that helped kind of connect us a little bit more. I think really the fact that since I was a baby, I've been with them, and I grew up knowing them. I mean, they were basically my parents. Yeah. But even, you know, like just since I could understand, they'd always been, you know, very direct. Sharing things, obviously not in an adult conversation, but, you know, just in a way that is understandable of what the whole situation, what the whole picture is. And then, I mean, ministry helped with that too. You know, I think just the openness of, you know, going to and seeing, and even we went to an orphanage one time, and it's like, hey, this is, you know, kind of like where you came from, but, you know, so it's always been, you know, present in our lives. I think just being open about the subject and honesty is always like a good thing for, you know, help kind of manage that. That's really one thing that really helped me. Just the upfront, you know, don't sometimes I feel like maybe, which I've heard, you know, the struggle as well, but sometimes you try to protect your kids, and as a parent is understandable, but, you know, in the long run, you know, if they find out, you know, when they're a teenager that they were adopted, I think if you're adopted, you already struggle with identity. I mean, finding out years later when you thought, you know, one thing, but it's not, I think would be I think if I put myself in those shoes, I think I would have been kind of destroyed about it.
Yeah, yeah,
Makes sense.
definitely.
How about then when you came to the States, did you find it difficult to fit in?
Yeah, culture-wise, you know, like we talked about, it's just a little more reserved and stuff, but I mean, it never really slowed me down from, you know, trying to be, you know, I did try to fit in with a couple people and things like that, but it never really worked out. And, you know, there was one girl that I clicked with, and I was like, hey, it's like one person. And at first we hated each other, but we became the best of friends. And I mean, I took it and ran with it. You know, I was like, hey, things happen for a reason. And I've started to learn, I think since a young age, that when things really don't start working, when it kind of feels like you're pushing against something, it's probably because, you know, God doesn't really, that's not what God has for you. And so you just have to really be open to listening on, hey, okay, this isn't it. Where am I supposed to go?
Well, you mentioned kind of in the last year that you've felt kind of not fitting in your identity or not really knowing who you are. Do you want to touch on that a little bit?
So we mentioned that I worked at a church, and I was there for about 2 years. And trying to fit in wasn't really something that I had intentionally done until like the past couple of years. You know, when I started working there, it was because I was working previously at a doctor's office. So after Bible college, I did EMT and worked with a doctor, but it was not the best atmosphere. So I quit that job, and the pastor offered me a position. And so I thought that I'd made it. You know, growing up in missions, growing up in ministry, I thought, and I was like, this is it. I mean, I'm on the worship team, I'm on a church staff. I'm like, this is what God had for me. And I'm like, I made it, I'm at the top. And as a year went by, a year and a half, closer to that 2-year mark, things just started getting more difficult. I mean, the workload was more. I was working at a church, but, you know, it was kind of like I felt alone. And so I really struggled with that. I think it changed a lot of my perspective in Christianity. You know, it kind of made me doubt, you know, church, and it made me doubt Christians. And I went through this season where I just kind of backed away from God, and I didn't want anything to do with God. And I think that season for me and my family was hard. It just going through what you thought was Christianity, and you realize that it's nothing at all like that. You know, you realize that, oh, I've been following a religion, not relationship. And anyway, when I started the medical interpreting in September, is when I moved up to Nashville. So I gave my 2 weeks notice, and I told them I had a better career opportunity, and that I had to pursue that. And but I had a lot of anger in my heart, and I had a lot of disappointment. And so when I moved away, I feel like I kind of made it worse for myself because it was a new city. I mean, I moved in with family, but not having anybody like spiritually guiding or checking in, you know, kind of like broke my heart. And going through that years later, you know, growing up in a Christian home, growing up in church, in ministry, it was hard. And, you know, I kind of thought, well, nobody really talks about that, you know, and in ministry, like, it's not always joyful, and it's not always good. You know, you go through rough seasons. And I'd always heard that, you know, being a Christian isn't easy. You go through the rough patches, but I don't think anybody really talks about how hard those rough patches are. And so I moved up to Tennessee. I had my car, I had my bills, whatever. And since I just started this career, money was tight for me. And so, because just like anything, you know, you start something new, and it's, you know, it's a slow process to get going. And after a couple weeks of struggle, I mean, I just kind of got frustrated, and I'd get more frustrated, and I just didn't know where to turn anymore. And I remember one night I put some worship music on, because that's what I used to do. My quiet time always looks a little different. As a worship leader, it's always been different. But I put worship music on, and I just started praying. And I said, "Okay, God," and I said, "You win." I said, "I'm done." I said, "I don't know what you have in store, but I know that you are faithful, and I know that you are good. I've seen it throughout my life. I've seen it growing up. I've seen you do it in other people's lives." And I said, "I trust that you can do it now."
Yeah, in your life.
In my life, yeah. And I said, "I don't know why, but you know why." And sometimes that's really all it takes. You don't have to do a super big prayer, but, just kind of throwing your hands up. And I just said, take my mustard seed faith and do what you can.
Yeah.
And I not only was intentional with that prayer, but I was intentional with the steps I took afterwards. I started looking for a church. I started going back to church. And the first Sunday that I was there, at a church in Tennessee, the pastor was talking about doubt. And one of the things he said was, God is not put off by your doubt, And, there was worship, and it just hit me like right in the moment. And after that, things just started rolling better. I went back to church. I started doing intentional devotional time. So reading my Bible, I found something that works for me. It's always looked different for everybody. I mean, I always had the idea that quiet time was, you sit down, you read your Bible, you journal a little bit, and, whatever Instagram or social media makes it look like. But, it's always different for everybody. So I found something that worked for me, and I committed myself to doing a month. I started with something small. I said, okay, every single day, I'm going to wake up at this time and I'm going to read my Bible. And I did. And when I got to the 30 days, I remember that feeling of like, I did it. Like, I accomplished, like, I finished the commitment that I set before God. And by that time, it was already a routine. But the things that just God has spoken in my life, and really just been placing in my heart, like ministry. Growing up, I said, I'm not going to be a missionary like my dad. And because at some point, I started not liking the traveling, the moving, and, making friends. And then you have to leave your friends. And so in 2017, God placed a vision in my heart. And we were driving in the city, and I saw this building, and what I saw, it's a abandoned building, but what I saw in this building was kind of like a shelter for homeless and like a food pantry type thing. There's a lot of indigenous people that come from the mountains, and they work in the streets to, try to make a living. And for some reason, like, we were driving by and God put that in my heart, and then in the hospital, family members aren't allowed to be with their kids. It's a children's hospital, but they sleep outside. So the whole time they have tents, and they're set up like a camp around the hospital, and that's where they live, in the dirt on the street. And I mean, and they won't move because their kid is in that building.
Why are they not allowed?
I think it's because of like how sick some kids are. They'll let at least one parent in every who knows how many hours. And so we had one family that we had met there. Her name was Karen, and she had cancer. Her parents were outside, and we had offered for them to stay at our apartment. And I got to know her and whatnot. Her cancer was in her leg, and they ended up amputating her leg. And she was good for a while. We got to meet them and stuff like that. But that one thing we did was something I said, I want to do that for more people. I said, I can't imagine the impact that my parents had on that family, opening our home doors to them, and having them, a place to sleep, a shower, and, they were safe. So I want to kind of, God's really been putting something in my heart to do something like that in Mexico. So who knows? Like, I'm excited to see what the next season is, and it's in my heart to really share, with at least the church in Mexico, because I know there is a lot of youth that struggle with that, where you go to church and you go through that disappointment, or something just, you think it's an expectation of church, but I understand it now, understanding it now and wanting to share that, having, like, talking about, hey, like, the struggle is real, it's, we talk about parents, they tell you, don't do this, don't do that. It's for a reason. And unfortunately, sometimes you have to go through it to understand it. But, my heart is for people, and my heart right now is to share that, that, hey, it's okay. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to, if you stray a little bit, or if you stray a lot, it doesn't matter, either way, God is God. God is still good. And, he's always waiting for you with open arms.
Yeah, that is so good. It's not a bad thing to struggle. It's okay that you're struggling. God's not gonna, he's always gonna accept you. And I thank you for talking about that, because I've gone through a season like that, and you're right, a lot of people don't talk about it. And I think it'll encourage others who may be going through that, and, it's okay. And I'm sure in your job now, I'm sure you have opportunities to really show the love of God to these people who, I don't know what kind of situations, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit, but I don't know what kind of situations with, like, medical interpreting, if probably bad situations, probably just, okay situations, but I'm sure you have lots of opportunities to love on people, especially speaking their language in a place where they probably feel like so overwhelmed not speaking the main language of the place you're in. Do you have any situations that come to mind? Or
Yes. Actually, it happened like right after, I jumped back in. I didn't jump, I dove. But, I started, these patients that I work with, they're workman's comp. So mostly construction workers that they fracture something, or they break something, or, or some people have fallen off of these, 10 feet or whatever. And so it's hard for them, because Latinos are very hardworking, and that's most of what they know, in life. They work. And for them to be home, not being able to work, not being able to provide for their families, it's not only a physical burden for them, but it's also a mental one. I had the opportunity of meeting a guy from Chile, I believe it was. And, not many times you see someone that's happy. He had a bad injury and whatnot, but had a great recovery. And sometimes I never know. I'm like, is it okay? Is it not? To encourage, to not. How much can I say? And he actually brought up kind of a little bit of the subject. I had been thinking about it, but he brought up the subject, and he mentioned, he says, after my injury, he said, I had a lot of time at home. He said, I could have watched TV. I could have done anything else. He said, but you know what I did? He said, I had so much time. He said, I would kneel and I would pray. He said, and that's what I did all day, and he prayed for complete recovery and quick recovery. And, and he said, I trusted that God, had control of the situation. He said, I don't know why it happened. He said, sometimes bad things happen to good people. And I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah. And, he just, that day I wanted to encourage him, but he ended up really uplifting and encouraging me. I ended up so passionate and excited and proud of what I do. Even if it's a day-to-day job, the fact that I can still do ministry with the career that I have right now is just, it overwhelms me with joy sometimes. And there, he's like one of many, same thing with another girl, I got a chance to speak into her life where she found herself in a tough situation, home wise, and being able to encourage her and tell her, hey, this isn't it, God has more for you, you were made for more. And being able to talk with her and encourage her and, just let her know, hey, I'm praying for you, really uplifted her, and so seeing the impact that I can have on people's life and the impact that they can have on mine, is very, very good.
So I think, yeah, we are wrapping up here. I guess, is there any advice you want to give for missionary kids, adopted kids,
or other people your age? Because I was just thinking, part of what I'm doing with mobilization is trying to reach your generation and encourage them to get involved in missions. And for me, it's really impactful. It's not real common that a missionary kid chooses to go into missions, really. So just even that you're considering it, I know that you shared with us a little bit about the vision that you have for the future. You've shared with me about, that you want to get established with your work. I love that you came to this country and you have not let go of your Spanish. I love that your mom fought for that, for you to continue speaking in Spanish, and that you're not ashamed of that. Like, that's part of who you are, that you're secure in that, and that is a huge blessing. And I try to share that with the immigrant children that I am around, because so many of them are losing their language. And it's unfortunate to me that I see that in the school system, almost they feel shamed because they don't speak English, and that somehow it's almost like I see them turning their backs on Spanish. And I really would love to encourage them to continue with their Spanish. And I love that you are using the gifts that you have just naturally in speaking Spanish in a different culture and incorporating that in your life here in the United States. But not only that, you struggled with your faith and you wrestled with that and came to this place that you know what you believe and why you believe it, and you're not letting go of that. You've grabbed a hold of the Lord, you surrendered to Jesus, and you've asked the Lord to really be in control of your life, and your heart is to serve other people. And do you have anything that you could speak encouragement to anyone, any word of advice for somebody that maybe is saying, oh, I think I might want to get involved in missions, but I don't know, I'm scared?
Yeah, I would say just jump in. Uncertainty is scary, but one thing that I read one day that really impacted my life was the world needs who God made you to be. And I think if you stand firm on that, everything else will just fade away. It's easier said than done to say, just fully surrender to God, but my heart is that young people don't necessarily have to go through that struggle to go to that place where you first encountered God. Growing up in ministry, at some point you have to encounter, the Holy Spirit and stuff. And I remember at a very young age, when the Holy Spirit, fell upon me, and it was scary and uncertain and new, but my heart's always longed to go back to that feeling. And I feel like I'm back there now, as an adult. It looks different and whatnot, but trust the season that you're in. And one of the things that has really just been for me has been just be intentional. I mean, even if it's making you look weird, if it makes you look odd or nerdy or whatever, whatever it makes you look, trust that God is using what He's put in your heart. And if it's something you think you're thinking, probably not. If you think you want to go into ministry, hey, God might be trying to tell you something. So, press into that and seek Him and pray about it. You don't have to do a religious prayer, just long and wordy, but I mean, just sincerely just say, hey, God, this is what I'm feeling. If this is you, show me, and open doors that'll take me to what you have in store.
One other quick question, if it's okay. Did it make a difference for you to have an agency that was a part, like, behind you guys as a family? Has that made a difference for you coming to the U.S., that there's a community?
Globe has always been like family for me. Growing up around different missionaries, it's always been family for me. So I think even wanting to go into full-time or into ministry, I know I have the security of the support, the same that my parents did, and it's not just the agency. It's, for me, it's family. I know that I have family that's praying for me and supporting me, and really wanting to see me follow through with what God put in my heart.
Well, I want to thank you for being part of the family. You have blessed us in the mobilization department. You went to Urbana, you went to the Send, and you've helped me with what I do as well. And it's just been a delight. It's been a delight from the moment I met you. I think that was probably in Mexico when I went to do the Kairos course years ago, and just hanging out with you guys a bit there. And you're just a joy, and I love hearing your testimony. Thank you for being so real with us today, and just authentic. You're really just sharing your heart and your struggles with us, being real about adoption. And thank you. Really, that has blessed me. I'm sure that other people will get stuff out of it.
Definitely.
And I'm excited to see, and doggone it, we got to get your application in, young lady. But I'm excited to see what the Lord is going to do in your life, just moving forward, Cristi. And I hear you, just saying, I want to get established in this before I do more in ministry, and it just sounds like just real wisdom. And I'm glad to see you taking the steps you're taking, and I know that hasn't been an easy journey, but I think that God has just used it in your life. I can see it. He's using it to be able to touch other people even through that experience. So thank you for sharing that with us today, being real.
Yeah, thank you so much for telling your story, just being willing to, be open, and we appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for listening to Crazy Missionary Stories.
If you're listening on Spotify, go ahead and give us a 5-star review. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, do the same. And on YouTube, subscribe to us and give us a like. And of course, share it with your friends and family. We'll see you next time.